This is ABC-7 Extra.
Welcome to ABC-7 Extra. Good evening. I'm Mauricio Casillas, filling in for Saul Sainz. For the next half hour, we'll be discussing the border crisis in Del Rio, Texas. This small border city, located about 400 miles southeast of El Paso, has become the epicenter of the national immigration debate. For the past week, thousands of migrants, the vast majority from Haiti, began camping out near and underneath the Del Rio International Bridge. And the situation quickly evolved into a humanitarian crisis. Young children and pregnant women are among the many seeking entry into the U.S. They're braving scorching temperatures and humidity. Texas Governor Greg Abbott quickly placed the blame, though, on the Biden administration.
These Border Patrol officers are overwhelmed with the amount of work they are required to do, and they're suffering the consequences of an administration that is not providing them either the personnel or the resources they need.
And the Biden administration also has come under scrutiny for the treatment of migrants. These images showing U.S. Border Patrol agents aggressively confronting migrants went viral. The video appears to show agents on horseback swinging their long reins near the migrants. In fact, in one video, an officer's horse nearly charges into a migrant who then falls back into the water. In another, a person on horseback was heard yelling profanity at the migrants. As a result, the Department of Homeland Security suspended the use of horse patrol in the Del Rio sector on Thursday.
Any mistreatment or abuse of a migrant is unacceptable, is against Border Patrol policy, training, and our department's values. Indeed, we have directed an investigation. That investigation is underway, and it will be conducted swiftly.
And El Paso has also played a key role in the Biden administration's deportation efforts. Hundreds of Haitian refugees have been flown into El Paso. They were processed by CBP here before being expelled to Haiti on U.S. Coast Guard planes like this one. The Biden administration has been using Title 42 to justify the expulsions. Now, this is a public health order dating back to the 1940s that allows the U.S. government to prevent people from entering the country over concerns that they may introduce a disease. In this case, we're talking about COVID-19. The order started being used by President Trump soon after the pandemic began, and then the Biden administration has continued to use it, which has led to outcry from migrant advocates. It's also important to explain why these migrants are fleeing Haiti. Thousands fled their home country this summer following the assassination of President Jovenel Moïse in July and the political unrest that followed. Top of that, a 7.2 magnitude earthquake also caused mass destruction in August, killing more than 2,200 people. Also, the country has dealt with severe poverty and gang violence for years. ABC-7 spoke to an El Paso pastor with ties to Haiti who provided more context on what's going on there.
Problems after problems after problems. And on top of that, you look at the nature, you look at the environment. Natural disaster is on top of the people. On top of that, it's a country that 85% of the population is unemployed. If they have legitimate fear of death or torture in Haiti, they will come back because the situation in Haiti is not good.
Joining us now to discuss the Del Rio situation is Lauren Villagran, immigration reporter for the El Paso Times. Lauren, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mauricio.
Well, I know that you and your colleagues with the Times have been covering the situation. They're there on the ground. So I wanted to ask you if you can give us a little bit of insight on what life is like in that makeshift camp.
Well, the camp on the north side of the river was captured by our photographer from Abilene, Ron Erdrich, who had an opportunity to visit the encampment. Unfortunately, he wasn't allowed by authorities to speak with migrants there. But migrants have cut Carrizo cane, created tent-like structures. Some were carrying sort of traditional store-bought tents. The government has provided tankers full of potable water, but the conditions are extremely precarious.
Lauren, I wanted to ask you, what do you make of the Biden administration's response to the crisis? The president himself campaigned on implementing more humane policies compared to his predecessor. But what we saw this week, in fact, you saw many Democrats calling criticizing the way that Biden has handled this situation. So what do you make of it?
Well, I think that I have questions that a lot of people have. This humanitarian crisis didn't come out of nowhere. Haitian migrants have been leaving Brazil and Chile, where they had first sought refuge, for years now. They were arriving in southern Mexico. During the Obama administration, Haitian migrants began arriving at Mexico's northern border and have created communities in both Tijuana and Mexicali. Now, you've seen additional Haitians leave Brazil and Chile as economic problems have worsened in those countries because of the pandemic and other internal factors. Immigrants are often the first to lose their jobs. So you saw people head north to Mexico. Mexico has an interesting asylum system that wherever you apply for refuge, which is what many of the migrants had tried to do, is where you have to stay. And for Haitians, their entry point has been largely Tapachula in Chiapas, which is Mexico's southernmost state and one of its most impoverished. Because the Mexican agency is overwhelmed, the asylum agency is overwhelmed, people have been forced to stay in a place where there is no work. So for months now, Haitians have been heading north, and specifically to Del Rio.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. You yourself reported on a situation earlier this year. You documented the journey of two women, one who tried to cross in Del Rio and another that tried crossing here in El Paso. So what did you learn about their experiences?
Yeah, it was really telling to speak to these two women. Both of them had similar backstories, having left Haiti, one for Brazil, the other for Chile, and they left for the reasons that I just described, the lack of work and racism they faced in those countries once the economies collapsed. One of the women had set up a life in Tijuana. It was a difficult life. She was working in a maquila there. She and her husband were both working in maquiladora factories there. She attempted to seek asylum in the U.S. earlier this year in the El Paso Juarez area here, and was turned back to Mexico, in part because she had permission to be in Mexico. She tried twice, I believe, and was returned under Title 42 directly over the Paso del Norte bridge. Another woman at the very same time had come up from Tapachula. She also waited months in Tapachula without resolution to her application for refuge, and had heard that Haitians were having some luck in the Del Rio area. As you said in your intro, it's a small city, Del Rio, and Ciudad Acuña also doesn't have the resources that a place like Juarez or Tijuana have. And my understanding is that there are some complicated factors, but some Haitians were being afforded credible fear interviews and were being processed to pursue asylum in the U.S. I think that, word spread. You also always see smugglers exploit any opportunity they see at the border. And so there's just been a lot of confusion that I think led in part to the large number of Haitian migrants seeking an opportunity in the Del Rio sector.
Very, very complex situation. Lauren Villagran, immigration reporter for the El Paso Times, we do thank you so much for your insight. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. When we come back, ABC-7's Stephanie Valle speaks one-on-one with El Paso Congresswoman Veronica Escobar to discuss her thoughts on the crisis in Del Rio, the legislative maneuvers Democrats are making to pass immigration reform, and her thoughts on asylum limits. You're watching ABC-7 Extra, where news comes first.
You've got enough to think about maintaining. Good thing the 2021 Volkswagen Tiguan has a lower cost of maintenance than Toyota RAV4. Come into your Volkswagen dealer today and get 0% APR financing for 36 months on the 2021 Tiguan.
It's Chevy Truck Month, and it's time to add the perfect accessories to your new Chevy. Make it bolder. Make it work harder. Make it your own. Find new possibilities. Find new roads. Get a total value of $3,000 on this Silverado 1500 Crew Cab Texas Edition. Plus, now during Truck Month, get a $1,000 accessory allowance towards the purchase of eligible accessories. Chevy Silverado, the #1 selling truck in the El Paso Las Cruces area.
The pandemic has impacted El Pasoans in unimaginable ways, and the challenge continues.
That's why ABC-7 is partnering up with Albertsons to support El Pasoans Fighting Hunger Food Bank. El Paso's only food bank is still providing 3 meals a day to 120,000 of our neighbors, and 1/3 of them are children.
And you can make a difference by making a donation right at the keypad.
Your dollar will go a long way.
Thank you for your generous contribution to this Albertsons Keypad campaign.
While other dealers are clearing out their 2021s, Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso has 2022s in stock and ready to rock today. Like 2022 Elantras in stock, 2022 Konas in stock, 2022 Tucson, Santa Fe's, and Palisades in stock and ready to rock. All available with zero down. That's zero down on 2022 models. And interest rates as low as 0.9% APR for 60 months. 2022s are here at Oscar Leaser's Hyundai of El Paso.
Isn't it great to have extra space? The 2021 Volkswagen Atlas and Atlas Cross Sport have more passenger volume than a Subaru Ascent and Outback. Come into your Volkswagen dealer today and get 0% APR financing for 36 months on the 2021 Atlas.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. These are protesters who marched across downtown this week condemning the treatment of Haitian migrants in Del Rio. That, of course, is the topic of this edition of ABC-7 Extra. Welcome back. I'm Mauricio Casillas, filling in for Saul Sainz. We wanted to get perspective from lawmakers on the immigration issues that we're facing not just here in the borderland, but all across the southwest border. ABC-7's Stephanie Valles spoke to Democratic Congresswoman Veronica Escobar. Here's what she had to say.
Congresswoman, El Paso and the southern border have been in the spotlight constantly due to the ongoing surge of migrants, many of them seeking asylum. And now that the effort to include immigration reform has been blocked in the $3.5 trillion proposed spending bill, what is the next step?
Stephanie, in order to address the challenges that we face with migration and really do right by our values and our history, it's going to take political will, and it's going to take a multi-pronged approach. The very first thing we've got to do as a Congress, and this is on Congress, is open up more legal pathways for migrants. I can't tell you how many times I hear people say, well, they should do it the right way, or let them get in line. For the vast majority of migrants who are making dangerous journeys, there is no line. There is no process. There is no right way for them to do it because those legal pathways have been shut down. If we open up more legal pathways, we can better manage this situation, whether it's through temporary protected status, whether it's simply by reopening up asylum processes at ports of entry. We've got to do this, and that's on Congress. We can't even get Congress, unfortunately, to support the DREAM Act. We passed it twice in the House of Representatives. The Senate refuses to act. We have not been able to get legalization for farm workers who provide critical resources to all of us to get food on our table. But my hope is that in continued conversations, we will open up legal pathways. We also have to change the way that we address migration patterns in general. We've got to start having annual migration summits with our partners so that together we address root causes of migration, and we've got to humanize the way that we address it at our nation's front door at the border. I have a bill that I will be dropping soon that completely re-envisions that process, restores dignity, and also maintains security.
And there are some efforts trying to get immigration reform passed through reconciliation. Shouldn't this be a standalone bill to be debated? Isn't it important enough to have that debate?
I agree wholeheartedly, Stephanie. Every single bill that we've passed out of the House, whether it is comprehensive immigration reform or fundamental universal background checks that are part of gun violence prevention, or a woman's right to reproductive health care, each one of these has been a standalone bill on its own, debated in committee, on the House floor, and will be passed along to the Senate, where it dies because of an instrument of paralysis called the filibuster. So because we've got to get work done for the American people, things like immigration reform and a number of other issues that are pressing crises like the climate crises, the only way we can do it right now is through reconciliation. So we're using the only vehicle that can withstand the relic of the past called the filibuster.
The president just proposed to raise the cap on refugees admitted to the U.S. What would this mean to communities like El Paso and Fort Bliss, which have become hubs for those seeking asylum?
It is so important that we support the president in doing this. Number one, refugees are an important part of our nation's fabric. They always have been. And the refugee cap was at historic lows under the previous administration. And as we can see in El Paso, in Del Rio, at airports even, is people fleeing their homeland who would like to seek refugee protections offered under law by the United States. The same kind of protections offered across the globe by other countries. We've got to restore our ability to ensure that we remain a nation of refuge. I can tell you research demonstrates that not just refugees, but immigrants in general are an economic benefit. They are a net economic benefit to the United States. Immigrants in general are far more entrepreneurial and essentially are far more law-abiding than natural-born citizens. And so it's advantageous to us, but also opening up legal pathways limits chaos at the border.
Should asylum be granted to anyone who is fleeing tough socioeconomic conditions?
We're going to have to change our asylum laws in order for that umbrella of asylum, the protections of asylum, to really meet the changing landscape across the globe. The asylum laws of the past may not be as applicable or responsive to what's happening right now. And so Congress is going to need to change those laws. But I am a believer that we've got to work collaboratively with other nations in our hemisphere. We're going to start saying, you know, if we think the situation is concerning now, Stephanie, mass migration across the globe is only going to become more severe as the climate crisis becomes more of a catastrophe, and as we see nations across the globe unable to handle shifting changes that create instability. So we've got to get this right, and it's going to take all of us working together to address this.
Do you think that people who are trying to apply for asylum or refugee status, should they be allowed to wait in the U.S. for 5 years or more, or would you support mass deportations if their cases fail?
I think that people who request asylum need to go through their critical fear or their credible fear interview, rather. And if they pass that test, they should wait in the U.S. for their hearing. The problem has been that there's a massive backlog of those hearings. That backlog became exponentially worse over the last 4 years. There are ways to address the backlog, and one of those ways is being implemented by the Biden administration, and that is having asylum officers adjudicate these cases, basically be the judge, so to speak. I support that as long as there are robust legal resources for asylum seekers and there's an appeal process. But I agree with folks that 5 years is way too long. That's unacceptable. And what it does is it erodes the system. And so if someone's case does not, if someone is not granted asylum, they have to be repatriated to their country. But we've just got to expedite that process, and we've got to ensure that the resources are available to asylum seekers.
All right, Congresswoman Veronica Escobar, thank you so much for talking with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you so much.
You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Still ahead, we're giving you the perspective of law enforcement. Border Patrol agents overwhelmed with the number of migrants there. You'll hear from a former Border Patrol chief himself about this situation. You're watching ABC-7 Extra. Stay with us.
At Long John Silver's our legendary lobster bites are back with a delicious vengeance. Prepared with herby, buttery goodness and fried to golden perfection, they're the perfect delicacy as part of your family feast. Order online at longjohnsilvers.com. Fish yeah.
Why bother mastering something? Why hand-tune an audio system? Why include the most advanced active safety system in its class, Standard? Because when you want to create an entirely new feeling, the difference between excellence and mastery is all the difference in the world. The Lexus ES. Every curve, every innovation, every feeling, a product of mastery.
Get $3,250 lease cash toward a 2021 ES350.
Experience amazing at your Lexus dealer.
There's a hot, spicy deal for every moment at McDonald's. Enjoy the flame-roasted Hatch Green Chili taste of the Hatch Green Chili Double Cheeseburger for only $2.50.
With a Honda in your garage, every summer adventure leads to another. Get an incredible summer offer on a new Honda, only at the Honda Summer Sales Event.
Ready, set, go.
Download the new ABC-7 Storm Track weather and traffic app. Hyperlocal weather conditions and custom weather alerts wherever you live and work. Plus, program it to show you when severe weather is coming. Get the new ABC-7 Storm Track weather and traffic app now from the App Store or Google Play.
Welcome back to ABC-7 Extra. This evening, we're discussing the crisis in Del Rio. Some Border Patrol agents have been scrutinized for their interactions with migrants, but the Border Patrol chief in Del Rio says his agents have also provided food, water, portable toilets, and first aid for these migrants. For more perspective on the challenges that agents have to face, ABC-7's Eric Elkins spoke to a retired Border Patrol chief and current UTEP professor.
Joined now by Dr. Victor Manjarres. And Victor, you served more than 20 years in the United States Border Patrol, including serving as chief. Can you give us some perspective on the enormous challenges Border Patrol agents face in recent days in Del Rio?
I sure can. Just to look at the sheer numbers in Del Rio. I've seen numbers ranging anywhere from 12,000 to 18,000 people. And to put that into context, or the right context, the Don Haskins Center here in El Paso holds just about 12,000 people. The population of Sunland Park is about 17,000 people. So we're talking about a very large group of people in a very short space that about 1,500 Border Patrol agents have to deal with in the Del Rio sector.
And it seemingly happens so suddenly, too. So when all of a sudden this is thrust upon Border Patrol, and you mentioned 1,500 agents compared to 12,000 plus migrants, obviously the ratio there is way off in terms of agents to migrants. What kind of challenges are they facing on the ground?
Well, the challenges are really pretty significant, pretty varied, because what we often forget about Del Rio sector, 1,500 agents does sound like a lot of Border Patrol agents, but they're responsible for patrolling over 300 miles of border in the Del Rio area. And so that's over three different shifts. And so what ends up happening is a lack of coverage in many areas in terms of patrolling. And just the sense or the magnitude of dealing with so many people that might have language barriers, they might have health barriers, there's often safety barriers, and so the challenge is very significant in terms of operationally, and in terms of logistically is how do you process, deal with that number of people in a relatively short time frame.
As someone who served more than 20 years in the U.S. Border Patrol and served in a leadership role, when you're watching this from afar, and granted a lot of these migrants ended up being processed here in El Paso, so we say afar, but really it happens in our backyard as well. But when you're watching this all unfold, what's really going through your mind?
Well, first is disbelief. on that, not only serving in the Border Patrol, but in the last 10 years studying issues of border security. So looking at things like the last 30 years. And what we're really witnessing is something unprecedented. We've seen flows before, significant flows before. But what's happening in Del Rio is really one event within a chain of events that has occurred all along the southwest border in the last several months, from Rio Grande Valley with people from Central America and South America to now Del Rio, other places in southern Arizona. So it's pretty significant in terms of complexity and the ability of not only the Department of Homeland Security but the Border Patrol to respond to this in a timely and an efficient manner as possible.
Obviously, what got a lot of attention, at least nationally, was the scene that unfolded with the agents on horseback handling some of the migrants. Of course, one of the things that was mentioned is when agents are faced with these types of situations, they don't always know who is a migrant versus who may be a smuggler, and the dangers that are present in those types of situations. But there's also a lot more that goes on behind the scenes, or maybe doesn't get noticed as much, in terms of the care that is being done by agents taking care of some of these migrants who are really just camped out with nothing under a bridge. When you see it from your vantage point, and especially when you see maybe just one or two moments highlighted so much nationally versus what's really happening there on the ground over the course of hours and days and weeks, what do you take? What's your take on that?
I sit in a position of benefit, obviously, is that through my experience, I've seen the compassion. I've seen to what great lengths Border Patrol agents will do to help others and quite frankly, risk their lives to help others in terms of, recovery, safety, things of that nature. So when I see images pop up that are, in essence, a glimpse in the day of the life, it's really unfair to the job that the men and women of the Border Patrol, they do every day. Because the biggest thing that comes to mind is the compassion that I've seen firsthand. And I think many of these individuals that are under the care of the Border Patrol will tell you the same thing. They compare that to their home countries and can't fathom the compassion that these men and women portray and demonstrate.
So you touched on it a moment ago, the fact that this is just one of a chain of events that's happening, and conceivably this may not be the last time we see something like this on any given part of the border. So going forward, I mean, I know this is a very complex, complicated issue, regardless of which party's in control of the White House or of Congress. What tangible progress can be made, and what needs to happen to get this situation under better control?
Well, unfortunately, what we've seen in the last 3 decades is, regardless of party and regardless of administration, everyone seems to kind of kick the can down the road in terms of the idea of border security and immigration. What we're seeing right now, or witnessing right now, are symptoms of a chaotic and uncontrolled border. It's because we simply treat a border simply as a linear line. We need to start looking at our efforts on the border more of an ecosystem, that there are variables near and far away that have an impact on what happens along the border, and we don't do that. We normally nationally, we look at it kind of piecemeal, and we offer tools with certain expectations of outcomes, and we're really are getting outputs, and no one's really kind of put that thought is what's the desired outcome at the end of the day that we want to see on our border, and we haven't done that yet in terms of policy action or policy development.
Are you optimistic that that could happen at some point? I mean, especially now, it's become such a politically driven issue and a political wedge, so to speak, in terms of migration and the border situation, regardless of what part of the border you're talking about. It is so hotly talked about. Are you optimistic that there is that change somewhere in the foreseeable future?
It's tough. It's tough to be optimistic. If we were to go down the street downtown El Paso and kind of interview the man on the street, I doubt that we'll find anyone that says, well, I haven't formed an opinion on border security or immigration. It's either extremely far right or far left, and that becomes very tense. It doesn't allow us to sit down and develop a comprehensive policy on how we want to handle our borders. And so it's hard. Witnessing the last 30 years, seeing the dynamics work in terms of you know, the ability to work together to come up with some solution, it's hard to be optimistic for the future.
Dr. Victor Manjarres, a UTEP professor and former Border Patrol chief, thanks so much for taking the time with us tonight on ABC-7 Extra.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have tonight for ABC-7 Extra. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm Mauricio Casillas. Have a great evening.